Stephanie.
Here.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yes, thank
The liberality with which you share your exquisite hospitality is really beyond measure. And you open your home, which is really a metaphor for the fact that you open your hearts. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. I rarely, and I don't like using what I consider the three morally freighted words, must, should, ought. Because if I say you ought, and you say I oughtn't, then immediately you know I think you're wrong. And so I don't think that's helpful in dialogue. So, however, one must always say thank you. So, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to be relatively brief. I even have a crib sheet so I can hold myself to, well, who knows what's going to happen. I need to say I was born and raised in the Episcopal Church, St. Louis, Missouri, All Saints Episcopal Church, through my family. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, Audia Horde Roberts, was a Baptist, First Baptist Church in St. Louis on the corner of First and Cardinal Avenues. And she took my brother and me to church with her on a variety of occasions. And every time we went to the church, I would come home and I would say, Mom, how come when we go to Mom, because she didn't want to be called Grand anything, we called her Mom. How come when we go to Mom's church, the people, because they spend all day, the people are excited to be there and don't want to leave. But when we go to All Saints, the people seem they're always ready to leave. I said, why is that? And she never could answer my question. I do not remember a word of a sermon I heard at First Baptist, but I do remember the energy. And I do remember the vigor and the fervor. And I don't know about you, I don't remember all the sermons I've heard. But then again, I don't remember what I had for breakfast 3 weeks ago, but I know I was fed. So I think sermons are kind of like that. So what I'm going to do is share a few things. First of all, and it's really in the acknowledgments in the forward, I've been asked for many years, Ponthiola mostly, why don't I publish sermons? And it is because of what I consider a sermon to be. A sermon is a real-time, in-the-moment utterance, a dialogue between, in this case, a cleric and a people. It's not even the printed text, no matter how accurate it is. It's not the audio tape. It's not the audio visual. It's that in-the-moment sermon. So that's the sermon. This is a book of sermons, okay? And so these are not sermons. This is a book of sermons, and there's a difference for me. But truth to tell, if I have to be honest, part of the reason I didn't want to publish is because I like acceptance. I like acknowledgement. You don't have to agree with me, but I want you to accept me. And I don't like rejection. And if you put stuff out and people say, oh my God, I read that, that's terrible. You take a risk of that. And so I didn't want to put it out. However, I have to thank my bride, Ponthiola. And I say it in here chiefly because she knows that I don't always practice what I preach. Yet she has been with me and for me unconditionally in benevolent ways beyond my power to profess. I also thank our daughter, Krista, who even at 37 or 38 knows more than I know at her age. And I also want to thank Loretta Vini, who pressed me to do this, who even read through tons of sermons. How many did you read? 300?
300.
300. to produce a text of 30. And I want to also thank Rebecca Justice Shunier. And in an inscription in the book to you, one of the things I said about you is that you are my conscience. And as shared at the morning service, what I mean by that is I really don't know how it is for me that you know more than I know, not only when I was your age, but even now. And how often by your words, what you think, what you feel, and how you express them, you challenge me to rethink what I think about something. Always, always. Now sometimes I'm annoyed, but I always benefit from your words. And so I want to thank you, and I appreciate you greatly. Okay, friends, what I want to do, and I'll keep this brief, I want to read pieces of sermons and then ask rhetorical questions and leave the questions with you to ponder. Okay? The first sermon I want to read, or from which I want to read, the title of the sermon is Bad News? ? And it's based upon a gospel, the gospel according to Mark. And by the way, not by the way, I want to thank the community of St. Mark's. I'm in my 37th year of ordained ministry and my 16th year as rector of St. Mark's. And as I move toward retirement, about this time next year, I am reminded daily how important the community of St. Mark's is to me. I have never served in a community where it was all right, fair game, and accepted in role to stand up publicly and in response to a question say, I don't know. Every place else I've served, I had to be the epitome of certainty. And so it's all right here to say, I don't know. I've also never been in a place where everything, other than here, everything had to go across my desk. Here, nothing goes across my desk.
That's because you don't know anything.
That's exactly right. Okay, so I'm going to read the first 4 paragraphs from the sermon Bad News. And then I want to leave a question with you and then press on. Bad news. Nobody likes to hear it. One of my favorite lines from the musical The Wiz, that updated Broadway rendition of the classical movie The Wizard of Oz, is sung by the Wicked Witch, who proclaims,
don't give me no bad news.
if you want to be my buddy, bring me something I can use. But don't you ever bring me any bad news. Bad news. Nobody likes to hear it. And other than the misguided or misanthropic, nobody likes to give it. However, sometimes, given prevailing circumstances, one can't avoid it. At Caesarea Philippi, Jesus asked his disciples, "Who am I to you?" And Jesus declared, "Messiah, the long prophesied, long awaited divine messenger." Jesus, given the Jewish communal cultural longing for deliverance from oppression in his time, from that of the Roman Empire, and the restoration of the golden age of the Davidic monarchy, by necessity had to teach his disciples what kind of Messiah he was, telling them that he must suffer and die. Bad news. When I feel oppressed, encompassed by difficulties, perplexed by which way to turn and what to do, in caring for my mother, stricken with Alzheimer's disease, with costs escalating, and our material means and ends of assuring her good care growing farther apart, and even more, with every medical or surgical procedure to prolong her existence, one I can't imagine she would have chosen, leading me, frankly, selfishly, calling me to second guess every decision I have ever made for the sake of her survival, or bearing up under the weight of a ministry with never-ending demand to be met by my always limited resources of time, energy, and wisdom. When I'm perplexed and encompassed about by difficulty, if I have a choice between something or someone who can save me from my travail or join me in the midst of it, without hesitation, I choose the first. Misery loves company, according to the old adage, but when I'm in trouble, I don't want the sympathy of company. Please don't tell me I know how you feel, or I've been there too. I want a solution, and preferably one that matches my expectations.
Amen. Yeah.
So friends, I simply ask you, and this is the question I leave with you, in terms of moments of perplexity, in terms of moments when you hear or have to give bad news, what is your coping mechanism for that encounter in life that we all deal with over and over and over again? So I just leave that question with you. I want to read now from a sermon, the title of which, by the way, I got into putting titles on sermons a long time ago, and I often don't know what the title is until after I finish writing it, and it's never finished. Even after it's preached, I think of things that I might have said, and certainly with sermon seminar, I'm often given things I wish I had said. But this one is entitled A New Script, and I want to read a few paragraphs, just a few. I have spent a lifetime to date and counting coming to know myself. Yes, I still have moments when I, in the words of the Apostle Paul, look in a mirror dimly, when I don't see my reflection clearly, when I'm not sure what I'm thinking or feeling, when I haven't a clue as to why I have done or said something or not done or not said something. Nevertheless, largely I know myself fairly well. And by fairly, I mean deeply, but not necessarily justly, for I'm not always kind to myself. When I look at myself closely, that is, honestly, my flaws and failings tend to loom large, making it difficult sometimes for me to behold and claim my virtues or to accept graciously kind words from others. At times, it's hard for me to hear a compliment when much of what I see is the worst of me. Therefore, at times it's hard for me to be humble, by which I mean having an even-handed perception of myself, the bad and the good, my weaknesses and my strengths, and then by faith being able to say yes to life, to move on and not be out of balance, out of sorts, or immobilized. So this is all about what new script would I write if I could write one. So I ask you, what new script would you write if you could write one? This sermon. Relationships are hard. And actually, because of the way I pay attention to myself in relationships, this was an easy one to write. We humans are made to be in relationship. I like when you begin with an obvious fact. Okay. According to the second creation story of Genesis, God creates man and woman, for it is not good that one be alone. Why not? James Weldon Johnson, inspired by this story, seeks to answer this question in his epic poem, The Creation. Imagining a lonesome God who breathed creation into existence and then, still sensing a forlorn emptiness in the cosmic soul, decided to make humankind. I like the way I wrote that. Okay. God, lonely and longing for companionship, creates. So we, created in the image of this God, live and long to be in relationship. This truth of our elemental ontology stirs up within me a lifelong inveterate questioner, my most Job-like inquiry of the divine. God, if, or more truly, as relationships are essential to our humanity, then why must they be so difficult? As they're so necessary, could you not have made them easier to do?
Yes.
Relationships are hard, whether of parents and children, siblings, spouses, partners and lovers, friends and acquaintances, whether personal or professional, whether ourselves with ourselves. Relationships are hard. Perhaps it is because, as Paul says, now we see in a mirror dimly, unable at any given time to see ourselves wholly clearly or to know ourselves fully. Hence, it is difficult to be in relationship when, truth to tell, we're not always sure who we are. Relationships are hard. See, this goes on. Perhaps it is because, as much as we strive to achieve some measure of self-actualization and self-affirmation, we learn and know much about ourselves by looking at our reflections in the eyes of others. We may prize independence, but the developmental stage beyond that, in some sense indicating a greater measure of growth, is that of interdependence, and interconnectedness one with another. Yet, even knowing this, it is a terrible truth, I think, that in our relationships with one another, sometimes what is reflected, what we see of ourselves in and through the reactions of those around us, are what I call our lesser lights, our less than admirable traits, often in the face of which we, in guilt and shame, turn away. Certainly, emotionally, at times too, physically, thus interrupting, even breaking the cycle of connection. Any of this ring true to anybody? Okay, I could read more, but it's just too depressing. So, okay, let me see. What question was I going to ask you? Oh, this sermon was based upon the story of the Samaritan woman at the well, 4th chapter of John. Mm-hmm. And this is the woman where Jesus says, and she says, well, I'm going to go tell my husband. And he says, you have had 5 husbands. And the one you now with is not your husband. Now, in that story, she also comes to the well at high noon. Who goes to fetch water at high noon?
No one.
And she's a Samaritan. Jesus is a Jew. She's a woman. He's a man. They shouldn't even be having a conversation. Yet they engage in dialogue. He's speaking of spiritual things. She's thinking of physical things. When he talks about living water, she's trying to find a bucket to lower into the well. Nothing about that dialogue and interaction is right. Yet she is my model of because she had 5 husbands. And by the way, you know Jewish midrash? What was not in the scripture, you just kind of reflect and fill in the blanks. I was going I said, why would she have 5 husbands? So I thought, well, maybe the first time she married for love, but that didn't work out. Then the next time she tried it again for love, because we can try again, that didn't work out. Then the 3rd husband, well, he was a ne'er-do-well. The 4th husband, he was abusive. The 5th husband, he was a drunk. So but she didn't get married anymore, but she still lived with someone. She is my paradigm for someone who doesn't give up trying, even though relationships are abominably hard. Okay? So that's what that's about. All right? And the final sermon I'm going to read, from which I'm going to read, is a sermon, Here I Lie. Do you all remember the story of the paralytic man who was lowered down the roof to Jesus? Well, this is one of those cases where I took on the personality of the character and acted and spoke out of that, in that voice. Some people came, bringing to Jesus a paralytic man, carried by 4 of them. That's from the scripture. Here I lie on my mat, my permanent resting place. Since that day I was repairing the roof after a severe storm. I slipped and fell to the ground, landing on my back, been paralyzed since. My freedom of mobility, my easy engagement of life in labor and leisure, all gone. Making matters worse are the chastisements I receive from others, particularly my family. They question me about my sin, for nearly all believe in a causal connection between sin and suffering. What innocent person ever suffered or was abandoned by God, they demand. At first, I could think of no honest reply. I'm not perfect, but what sin caused me to fall from the roof? I was clumsy. I slipped. I lost my balance. I fell. That's it. That's all. But they persist. Surely something very grave caused this, they solemnly intone, while wringing their hands and pitying my stubborn resistance. I feel cornered. I want to resist their arguments, but I fear they might be right. Now, when you go on in the story, the friends lower the paralytic to Jesus. And Jesus says an enabling word that allows him to get up and walk. So my question I leave with you is, because paralysis takes all kinds of forms. Is there anything in your life where you can envision the movement of what you'd like to become, yet you and I have yet to take a step? For all kinds of reasons. For me, it's largely fear. Even in the worst of myself, at least I know that. I am not going to be surprised by anything that comes from that. But if I take a step in the direction that I envision would be for me a larger, better self, it will be so new I won't know how to act. So sometimes the paralysis of staying stuck is a safe place to be. So I simply ask you, if you could hear an enabling word about some aspect or aspects, I mean, I got aspects, you may have just one, I got lots of them, aspect of my life, what would that be and to what would it be directed? So I leave you with that question. The final piece I'm just going to share with you from, it's a sermon called Innocence Lost, and it's about another garden story. You know, you read the story, it still happens, it ends up the same way. Last week I was with my bride in South Carolina. We spent a wonderful time. She didn't work me too hard, and that's a good thing. because she has put a new term to retirement. It's called rehirement. And I'm going to go to work for her. She wasn't laughing, so I didn't either. And by the way, I do have to say this. For those of you who don't know Ponthiolo, or haven't had the exquisite pleasure, she really is the best reason to know me. And part of the early retirement is, yes, we launched a business, but part of it is she has followed me everywhere. She has reinvented herself many times over, because she's the entrepreneur. I'm the one stuck in the institution, and as much as I grouse from time to time, it's safe. She's the one who takes risks, and she will step out on a limb and jump, because I'm tied to her. Whether I want to jump or not, I got to go with her. But frankly, retiring early and going to work with her and work for her, it's not about grace and gift. It's about wage. I owe her. And I don't really have enough time in the rest of my life to pay her back. But I'm going to try. Because I owe her. And so that is in a good part of what this is all about. So anyway, last week, I was down there. I was walking through the house talking to myself.
To himself.
Oftentimes I'll say, okay, people. As Pontiolo who helped me understand years ago, that when I say that, usually in the morning, I'm talking about all these inner constituent parts within me. And you know, it's a great day when they answer. Because sometimes they don't answer. But anyway, she said, you're talking to yourself. And so, but we've been apart for so long, she wasn't used to it anymore. So I was walking through talking. And she said, why do you talk to yourself? And my immediate answer, without thinking, was, my father talked to himself. And so it's learned behavior. But then I started thinking, I said, well, it's kind of the way I sort things out from time to time. I talk to myself and I answer, and sometimes it's a 3, 4, 5-way conversation. And sometimes all the voices are going at the same time. It's really quite an incredible experience. But in any case, the funny thing was, I sat down to reflect on a sermon to share with you, and I picked this sermon without realizing what it was going to say. Because you ever write stuff and you don't quite remember everything you wrote? Okay. For a long time in my family, by the way, the reason why I go Paul Roberts Abernathy is I'm seeking to claim my entire heritage. Because my growing up years in my nuclear family wasn't pleasant. Wasn't particularly sweetness and light. You know, my father was a raging alcoholic and an angry man. In large measure because he didn't have the opportunity others might have had. In large measure because he was a person of color, trying to make it in a world where the majority race predominated. Not only that, my father was a very dark-skinned man with straight black hair because his father was Cuban. So therefore, he wasn't accepted in the African-American community because he didn't have the right hair. He wasn't accepted in the white community because he didn't have the right color. So he was an angry man. When he came out of the war in World War II, out of the army, he had 2 jobs he could do. One was to be a school teacher, for which he had not the temperament, because he had no patience. The other was being a postal clerk. So that's what he did angrily for 40 years. My mother was a quiescent, compliant woman raised to obey her husband. Therefore, she didn't know how to protect her sons when the father, in his mercurial alcoholic swings, would lash out. You with me so far? Mm-hmm. So by the way, those of you who know that rageful side of me, you know where it goes. For the longest time when I was growing up, I contented myself by saying, I know I'm adopted. I couldn't possibly come from these people. And then, lo and behold, as I age, every morning when I shave, I see more and more my father's face. I am his son. Damn. I just want to read one paragraph. Oh, that we could revert to a childlike state, start all over, get it right, which in some sense we try to do with our children as our parents sought to do with us. But try as we might, we can't get it right. Our children learn from us. They too lose innocence and act accordingly. And even as we grow older, we may find ourselves saying more often than not, I am becoming my father or my mother. And often when we say that, it is decidedly not a statement of self-congratulation or thanksgiving. So I mean, it was amazing when I was explaining this to her, and I pulled out this sermon and read that. So anyway, that's all I want to read tonight, and I share this with you.
Okay. I have a couple more words. Sorry. I talked about the warmth that you share and working with you as a poetry person on a staff, and I talked about the care of the way that you use words. But hearing some of these excerpts from your sermon just hammered in a particular way for me two things. And one is that often we have to choose in our mentors and our teachers and our preachers, our pastors, people who are emotionally open, who share who they are, their experiences, who are comfortable saying what you just said about your father. I respect those people tremendously. And then often there are different kinds of people who are intellectual giants, who are able to dig deep into the scripture and into the history of Christianity, who can open up the history of something, a word or something intellectual, and usually you have to choose. We haven't had to choose with Paul. He does both so well. And I think that's the thing that comes out of your sermons the most, is that you do both of those so well that you bring out the personal, the cultural, the historical, the biblical, and weave it together in a way that reminds me that I should never, as a preacher myself, settle for less, and I never want to settle for less when I hear a sermon. And thank you for that. It's a privilege.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, we've got, Loretta's videotaping us.
No, I'm getting up.
Um,
I'm going to get up in just a minute.
Okay, but we've got more books, and Paul's going to be signing them. We don't want to keep him on his feet much longer. He really, literally has been standing up since 8 this morning, so we want to let him sit down at some point. And then I trust that we have some more goodies of, oh good, we've still got some cheese and some wine and some bread. I don't know, I'm sure Paul, you'll be available for a little bit more if people want to reflect with you about
Sure,
anything.
absolutely.
Okay.
I have no
All
place to
right.
go.
Well, thank you
I mean,
all.
I do, but I don't.
No. And again, the main thing is I want